White House is the residency and a major workplace of the President of the United States. Throughout the centuries, the big mansion has been a place of many historical events and gatherings of various important figures. It has been the residence of every U.S. president and their family since John Adams in the 1800s. However, not everyone knows that it is also one of the most haunted houses in America. Hillary Clinton once said, "There is something about the house at night that you just feel like you are summoning up the spirits of all the people who have lived there and worked there and walked through the halls." While Harry Truman once wrote to his wife that the damned place is haunted sure as shooting. But they were not the only ones. Ronald Reagan, Eleanor Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and many others, they have all experienced a ghostly presence while staying in the White House. So what may be the theoretical explanation of the hauntings of the White House? Haunted Habitability, Wilderness, and American Haunted House Narrative by Christine Wilson turns out to have the answers. Wilson focused on the notions of the wilderness and domestication and the relation to haunted narratives. According to her, it is impossible to fully domesticate a haunted house and truly make it one's own. This theory may appeal to the White House and serve as an explanation of the hauntings. In this case, as the wild space, we may take the original look at the first inhabitants of the White House and as domestication. Every other presidential couple's attempt to make it their home. Wild spaces produce immortality in its inhabitants, wrote Wilson. This may be why did a ghost of Abraham Lincoln appear to Ronald Reagan or Franklin D. Roosevelt's family? Christine Wilson also writes about the place, attachment, and need to own the space. Having control over a house and the feeling of owning it is, according to her, crucial for a well-being. And how can a new president feel like he wholly owns the White House? And how can he treat it like it's his own home, while his subconsciousness is making him remember about all the residents that came before him? Possession is associated with what came before, says the author of the text. What is also interesting in the text is the statement that women are usually more likely to detect supernatural than man, and this is also the case of hauntings of the White House. The majority of people who actually saw the ghost were women, first ladies, daughters of the president, housemaids. This may be the case because women usually associate the house they live in with something more personal. For a first lady in the White House, it is not an office or a place she is allowed to sleep and live for a few years, but automatically a homely space. In Western culture, women are often a symbol of domestication and often are seen as having a stronger bond with the home that they live in. This could be the reason for many ghosts seen in the White House being female and approaching female guests. The general conclusion of our theory is that full ownership of the White House is impossible or incomplete, just like in the cases of every other haunted house. The new residents will always subconsciously feel invaded by the presence of those who lived there before them. Regarding some of the spookier happenings to take place in the White House, in the mid-19th century, the deaths of Zachary Taylor, William Henry Harrison, and James K. Polk horrified citizens of the United States. Many believed they were poisoned by their enemies. But were they? Being the President of the United States is a very stressful job. Recently, it is very visible in Barack Obama's presidency and in his appearance. They age prematurely and gray under challenges of the office, but it's not the stress that killed the most important people in the U.S. So what was it? Between 1840 and 1850, living in the White House was fatal for 3 of the 4 presidents who served. William Henry Harrison was elected in 1840 and died after his first month in office. James K. Polk was elected in 1844 and died 3 months after he left the White House. Zachary Taylor was elected in 1848 and died about a year into his term in 1850. The question is, what had happened to them? Were they poisoned by their enemies? Was it bad luck or coincidence? Or maybe the White House is killing them all? Let's find out. As the legend says, President Zachary Taylor on July 4, 1850, indulged in refreshments, including a bowl of cherries and milk, and later that day suffered from severe abdominal pain. He was quickly treated by the doctors. However, with no success, he died 5 days later. Was this an assassination? Rumors began circulating quickly. Why? President Zachary Taylor, coming from the South, opposed the growth of slavery, even though he was a slave owner himself, worked on laws preventing expansion of slavery. The tension between the South and Taylor grew quickly. The death of the president was very mysterious and suspicious. People were convinced that he was poisoned. In late 20th century, an American professor called Clara Rising convinced living relative of the president for an agreement of an exhumation of his body. However, the team of the Kentucky medical examiners assembled to examine the corpse decided that Taylor was not poisoned, but he had died of natural causes. Furthermore, Taylor was not the only president who suffered from stomach troubles. James K. Polk frequently mentioned his horrific diarrhea. Moreover, President Harrison also suffered from indigestion most of his life. He battled with it using carbonated alkali to neutralize gastric acid. However, the natural defense against bacteria was weakened. So what really killed the presidents of the United States, you may be wondering? The Washington, D.C. had no sewer system in the mid-19th century. It was built in 1871. The White House water from spring or well water piped in. There was a need for sanitary sewage process. There was no poisoning, no assassination whatsoever. The lack of sewage system, technology, medical knowledge resulted in gastroenteritis. The presidents probably caught salmonella bacteria and died from pains and dehydration of diarrhea. However, we can say that the White House killed the presidents. The other presidents that seem to still be roaming around the halls of the White House is Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was America's 7th president and was in the office from 1829 to 1837. He died June 8, 1845, and ever since that day, it's been said that his presence can still be felt in various places in the White House. One of the first people to mention Jackson's ghost was Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's wife. It is said in 1865 she actually confronted his cantankerous ghost in his former bedroom, the Rose Room, which also happened to be the room where most of the sightings of him are seen. Since Jackson was often known for having a very boisterous personality, guests who have visited and stayed in the Rose Room claim to hear Jackson stomping around, cursing, and chuckling. As for many alleged ghosts and deaths in the White House, the most popular and common one is Abraham Lincoln, the first president of the United States to be assassinated. There's a lot of stories about his appearance, first one reported in 1923 and the last one in the 1980s. But before we get into those, let's take a look at America's 16th president. Mr. Lincoln was nominated in the presidency in 1860 and he won the elections in March 1861. It was the first time the Republican Party came to power. He got the U.S. through the Civil War, abolished slavery, and he was also chosen for the second candidacy. He started planning on reuniting the nation. On April 14, 1865, while watching Our American Cousin play in Ford's Theater, Lincoln was shot in the back of the head by John Wilkes Booth. The shooter was a Confederate sympathizer supporting the slavery, therefore he didn't agree with the president's politics. One of the things that is discussed till today is how easy the access the killer had to the presidential box in the theater, and the fact that the president was not guarded. After being shot, Lincoln was moved to a near boarding house where he passed away 9 hours later. Mary Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln used to sense in the White House in order to contact their late son. After her husband died, Mary decided to reach him through senses as well, as she said successfully. Many believe that though Lincoln died in the Peterson house, his soul is trapped in the White House because of his mentioned senses. Others claim that the ghost appeared in places, for example, in his hometown, Hodgenville. Even if that was the case, the White House seems for his favorite place to visit and haunt. Perhaps it was because of the unfinished business. As we already mentioned, Lincoln was planning on reuniting the nation since the abolishment of slavery and Civil War divided America, and the distance between the Democrats and Republicans were visible more than ever. He was shot soon after he was elected for the second candidacy, so he did not have time to execute his plans. It was the time of Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration when there were the highest number of sightings of Lincoln's ghost. The First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, was spending a lot of time in Lincoln's bedroom because it was her study. Even though she didn't see actual ghosts, she could feel his presence numerous times. When the Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands visited Washington, she sat at the White House. One night, she heard a knock on her door. When she answered it, the Queen supposedly heard Lincoln's ghost, wearing his favorite top hat. She fainted immediately. During the visits of the British Prime Minister during World War II, Lincoln's ghost decided to make an appearance again. Churchill was taking a long bath, and after hopping out, he walked into the bedroom naked, only to see Lincoln standing by the fireplace. The minister later confessed that they looked at each other and he said, "Good evening, Mr. President. You seem to have met me at a disadvantage." Lincoln reportedly smiled and faded away. Winston Churchill requested an immediate change of rooms. He didn't, however, stop taking his favorite long baths. There were also several cases of weird sounds and footsteps in occupied rooms on Lincoln's floor. Many speculated that President's ghost remains in the White House to help in the time of crisis, as well as to complete his work of reuniting the nation. But not all of the ghosts that are in the White House are necessarily large political figures. For example, Anna Surratt. She was only 22 years old when her mother, Mary Surratt, was hanged in connection with the assassination of Lincoln and working along with the John Wilkes Booth. Every year, on the anniversary of her mother's hanging, July 7th, it is said that she can be banging on the doors of the White House and sitting on the front steps, begging for the release of her mother. Fact or fiction, believe it or not, you can be the judge of that.